Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We're excited that you could join us today for Views from an Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body. My name is Alex Elliott. I am the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. As many of us are descendants of settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, we, CIIS Public Programs, must recognize and never forget that our university's building in San Francisco occupies traditional, unceded Ramaytush Ohlone lands. If you are interested in learning more about Native lands, languages, and territories, we encourage you to visit native-land.ca. Now let me first introduce our presenters, Rebekah Taussig and Alex Locust, and then we'll get right to their conversation. Alex Locust is a queer, Black, biracial glamputee. Whether as a counselor, harm reductionist, pleasure activist, runway model, or film festival juror, Alex serves up the 3 C's, curls, crutches, and claws, while singing the praises of the disability justice movement any chance he can get. Alex has set out to use his platform to center the voices of Black and brown, queer, disabled folks while weaving together the principles of this movement with other justice efforts to promote access, sustainability, and wholeness in all of our collective liberation work. Rebekah Taussig is a Kansas City writer and teacher with her doctorate in creative nonfiction and disability studies. She runs the Instagram platform Sitting Pretty, where she crafts mini memoirs to contribute nuance to the collective narratives being told about disability. Released by Harper One in August 2020, her memoir and essays, Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary, Resilient, Disabled Body, provides a nuanced portrait of a body that looks and moves differently than most. Rebekah and her partner Micah are the new parents of baby Otto. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Rebekah and Alex.
Hi, Rebekah.
Hi, Alex.
How are you doing?
I'm feeling my heart is beating a little bit faster as though our bios were being read, but I have to say I'm enamored with your bio. I feel like I want to go back and rewrite mine, the 3 C's. I love that.
Thank you. I love a good pun. I love a good alliteration. I love, I just got a tattoo with some rainbows on it. I really want to just have that beacon of like, did I mention I'm queer? Like, I just want it to be very undeniable.
And it's working and it's beautiful. And I was like a poem.
Thank you. Well, I am so excited to be in conversation with you tonight after hearing your bio, reading your book, seeing your platform. I thought maybe before we get into the juicy stuff, I know sometimes when my heart's racing, kind of doing the easy bits first. So I was thinking it could invite you to share your personal pronouns if you're comfortable, help model some access features, right? So offering an audio description of like the beautiful landscape that you're zooming into us from, and then just naming any access needs that you might have so that tonight can be accessible for you.
Let's do it. Okay. So I use she, her pronouns. I am coming to you in my study. So there is a wall of books to my left and kind of stacking up and creeping along the walls. We have an orange couch in the background, and there's 2 cats kind of curled up in the corner over here, and some more books and plants going on in the background. I'm a white woman wearing a red t-shirt with little eyeballs on it, and I've got some bangs and pink headphones on. Not headphones, yes. And access needs, I love that question, and I'm trying to think of what that would be tonight. I'll just let you know that I'm getting over a cold, and it's not a COVID anything, but it is a cold that has me. Sometimes I have a little bit of a cough, so I'll just warn us that I might have to pause for my hydration breaks. But that is where I'm at tonight. Alex, what about you?
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. Uh, my name is Alex. I use he, she, they. I'm open to all pronouns. In terms of an audio description for me, I'm reporting from my pink paradise. It's very pastel pink. I've got kind of a little camouflage moment going on. Long, black curly mane. I'm a light-skinned black biracial person. Got some nails, glasses, mustache. And access needs for me, I'm in a cozy chair. I've got some pillows. I got my water. I'm all set. I think I wanted to offer two quick things too, and wanted to see if you wanted to add anything else just before we jump in. I think in the beginning of your book, you offered this, right? But like, I think it's always helpful to name that disability is not a monolith, right? We're speaking from our personal experiences. We're not ambassadors in any regard. So I just like to kind of like couch that so that you can speak freely, so that I can speak freely, and people understand we're not speaking universally. And then I also wanted to invite you, to just really feel free to like decline, reframe, pivot any questions that I ask or any questions that the audience asks later.
Alex, I'm already loving this conversation with you so much.
Yay.
Yes, thank you for starting us off with that too, because I feel that with me every time I speak, every time I write. Like I am completely talking from this tiny narrow swath of my experience, and I think often, particularly with some unrepresented identities like disability, that so often it can feel or like we are speaking for so many people, or as if our experiences are somehow blanket across, and I know that mine are so particular, and I can really speak to those, and I'll do my best to be as specific with my particular experience, but that's kind of what I can offer. So I love starting there. Thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely. I think it provides that like freedom to really speak authentically without the pressure of like saying the right thing as this representative. And so maybe with that, right, in the particulars, I'm so excited to like get to know more of the particulars of you beyond just like loving the book that you've written. I'm curious if you want to like maybe just introduce yourself to the audience a little bit more beyond your bio in your own words, and then just to give you, if you have any like hope or intention for our conversation tonight.
I love that. Okay. All right. So beyond my bio, yeah, I wrote this book, and then like all of this life happened afterwards. So I have this book out in the world that was born from a lifetime of very particular experiences, and grew up disabled, paralyzed, used a wheelchair to get around from the time I was 6, but I didn't really have language to or community to really dig into or describe that experience or explore what that meant to me growing up. And so I was in graduate school. I was like late 20s when I found disability studies as a framework, and I found community, and I found language. And so the book is really born from that experience, right? Like a couple of decades of living in this body and not knowing quite what to make of it, or how to think about it, or what words to use to describe my experiences. Feeling very alone in that experience. And then suddenly, well into my adulthood, kind of finding words and community and people that helped me begin to reflect on all of these memories and all of these stories I grew up hearing, and kind of rethink kind of my own story, and who I was in the world, and who I could be, and what all of this might mean. And so the book, came out of that. I went online to Instagram to begin doing some of that work, and capturing some of my experience with attempting to capture it with words in that tiny space. And the book evolved from that, when I sort of reached the edges of that space and kind of felt myself hampered and hemmed in by the 2000, I think it's like 2,200 characters. Not that I've had to like know that, but so the book evolved and came about from that space, and then it was like less than 24 hours after I submitted the final manuscript that I found out I was pregnant, which was a really big surprise to me, and kind of changed things for me. And then a week later, it was like the next Tuesday, we found out my partner had cancer, and then all of us kind of entered into a new world as COVID came to be a real thing, and we responded to that. And so I feel like so much has changed since the book came out too. And I am living in that space very much right now. My son is 14 months old now, and I feel like he's been intense and passionate and busy from like the second day he was alive, but like it's like every day is more of that. I'm like, I don't know where this is going. Like, how much more intense and busy can we get? I'm not sure. He's a lot, and a lot of good and funny and time consuming and exhausting and all of that. Also, I feel like I threw out my husband's diagnosis, my partner Micah's diagnosis of cancer, and I also would like to say that he's doing well. He just this week marked his 1.5 years of scans and blood work coming back showing no detection of cancer. So I also would like to mention that. But yeah, I think that's a little bit about me beyond the bio, to kind of color in and add some shading to that. Yeah, life feels very different for me right now than it did when I was writing the book. And I feel like in some ways I'm sort of back at the beginning of like searching for language again. But yeah, that's a bit of where I am right now.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I love you saying adding some color, some texture, right? Some richness beyond the bio. And you touched on a lot of things that, I've got some questions that I'll kind of be pulling from, but I really want to, something that resonated with me and what you shared in there was kind of that grad school experience. I was born with a disability. I'm in like a grad counseling program. I'm like 24 and I learned about the 504 protests and like had not heard about this like historic sit-in that disabled people, facilitated and manifested. And I just wonder, you're talking about now feeling like you're kind of searching for language again, or feels like that cycle might be starting over for you. And I'm just curious, like, what was that feeling like when you found that language, when you found that community, when it was just kind of like that aha, right? But it's probably a lot more than just an aha in that moment for you in grad school.
Yes. And I want to hear more about what that's been like for you. Because I got goosebumps listening to you talk about that, just remembering that moment. I mean, I wrote about this a little bit in the book, but I distinctly remember the very first piece of disabilities studies, like literature that I read. I was like in my subsidized apartment on the ground floor in my like really tacky velvet green chair.
Yes.
And I was like so burnt out on grad school. Like, I don't know how that's been for you, but just exhausted by the relentless labor of a lot of it, trying to prove myself every day, trying to prove that I belonged there, trying to prove that I knew everything, right? Because that makes sense as a student. Trying to, scramble to pretend like I got every reference, like literary reference and scholarship reference, and just exhausted by the whole thing. And I had told my therapist like that day that I was gonna quit graduate school. I was gonna be done. I was gonna do something else. I was also really tired of being really poor. I'd been poor for a long time. You don't make a lot of money as a graduate student. And so I was just like tired of scrambling to pay for things. I was just exhausted by the whole thing. And it didn't feel like what I was putting into it was becoming anything that meant something to me. And
Mhm.
a friend of mine just sent me this article by Leonard Davis, and it wasn't anything we were reading in a class. He just thought maybe it'd be interesting to me, and the title of it was something like "Disability: The Missing Term in the Race, Class, Gender Triad," I think, something like that. And I'd never even seen disability in the title
Mm.
of a piece of scholarship. Like, just even like seeing that word in a space that wasn't medical, it was like the validation that this was like something worth thinking about.
Mhm.
Um, was even just that was really jarring to me. And then just going on and reading, like for the first time ever, looking at the social construction of the idea of disability and the notion of normal, and like tracing that back like into the lexicon of like, when did this word as we
Mm.
know it appear,
Yeah.
and what is the context of that. And I had never ever even considered that as a way of I never even thought about the history of how these things would come to be arranged. And so yeah, I as I sat in my chair and just read that article, it
Mhm.
felt like, I think the way I've described it, and it sounds dramatic, but it feels very true, is it felt like the physics of the universe were shifting around me.
Mm.
Like this is a different world than I thought it was, and there's something about this that makes so much more sense to me. Like these suspicions that I had, there's a way that we can trace them, and like there are words we can use to piece this together, where the the experience I thought I was having, but maybe was the only one who saw it that way. Like there are other people, and even just hearing in that article, I remember there were just like these tiny snippets describing stories of people with disabilities. And just like the humanness of those stories, and like the
Mhm.
recognition I found in that. So that was that one article, right? Like one article, and I'm like changing as a person.
Totally.
And then it was the next wave of that. So I like started reading everything. Uh, I feel like another wave, like Alison Kafer was someone for me. Reading Alison Kafer was another wave of like, there's there's so much here, and I'm seeing things differently. Everything I look at feels different. And then I think the next wave of that was finding people like online,
Mhm.
and reading their very human stories, reading them wrestle with ideas and think, and kind of the contradiction of experience of like, what does disability pride mean, and how does that show
Mm.
up for me, and how, like these things that felt so tender and personal to me, and seeing other people, like the recognition of seeing other people, also thinking about that, and seeing different ways that they were processing that, like different from me. And yeah, it absolutely changed the way it felt to be here on earth. So I don't, that it sounds dramatic, but I wonder if you recognize any of that, or how that's been for
Oh,
you.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, as a Leo, I'm very into drama, so
Okay, we're on the
you're
same page.
you're speaking to the right person. Um,
Thought maybe.
I mean, even the way you're describing it right now, I've never thought about it this way, but it sounds so much like, in like whether it's like a horror movie or a thriller or like something where the whole movie they've been planting Easter eggs that like at the end, and then they play that montage where they like piece it all together and they're like, see, the
Mhm.
the killer was here the whole time, and it's like ableism was here the whole time, but we had no idea that that's what it was, and it's just this
Yes.
insidious specter that like lurks and creeps and undermines and like eats away at. But if you don't know its name, you can't banish it. You can't exercise it out. And so, yeah, I feel like I hear that in your story. I know for me, it was like first semester of this grad program. I'd been working in a psych research lab around chronic illness and disability. So I was already seeing how psychology and research could like benefit and support disabled communities, which is like wholly different than all of my experiences with like the medical industrial complex prior to that. And yeah, just sitting in that class and watching that video about the 504 protests, seeing Judy Heumann, you know, just like shouting at that, you know, elected official and being like, don't tell me, you know, that you know how we feel. And I just like, I'm like crying in class. I'm like, I don't cry in academia, like that's not a thing. And it definitely felt like I would describe it as like that kind of like that lightning strike or like a bell that just can't be unrung. Like it felt like as close to like a calling of like, okay, wow, I'm following in a lineage of these champions, right? And I didn't know about them. I still know very little about them, but they feel like, you know, ancestors, they feel like people that I owe so much to, right? And it felt like there was literally no turning back. Like I couldn't unlearn that history exists and to like do anything other than situate myself as like a next generation of people committing to that cause felt like it's like that I can't there's nothing else like I love you describing like the physics of my universe, like my body chemistry just all like oriented to be like, well, disability justice, like that's it, you know. I similarly with Sins Invalid, seeing them perform, seeing like queer Black and brown artists, disabled artists like perform around sexuality, and this I was like just totally, yeah, rocked my world.
It's so good. I love that. I'm like trying not to just like shout while you're talking, because I just am like praise hands to that moment. I feel it too. And I'm like, I'm so eager. It's like this thing that I want to like, I want everyone in on, right? Like be a part of this, feel this, know this, have these words. Because I went so long without knowing, right?
Yeah,
Like I'm just picturing both of us growing up as like little 6-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds of just like not having that. And I'm so hopeful for that next generation.
Totally. Yeah, and it, you know, I mean, reading your book, I just like I felt that kinship with, you know, your like tender, you know, precious self with the you know the scabby knees and all the bruises, right? Like I was tripping all over the place. Like I felt that, and you know, I felt the way you described that sense of like isolation and loneliness and otherness, with an experience that is so normal, you know. And so now to see you as an adult and like healing, right, in that way, through like fostering community, cultivating community, I'm curious like how that feels for you to be in community with other disabled people, you know. Like we even just like prepping a little bit, we were so excited to like, we're two disabled people in conversation, right? And it's not like the one disabled character in a movie. So yeah, what does disability community mean to you? How does that feel to be in connection with other disabled folks?
I feel like we could talk about just this for the rest of the night. I mean, like, there's just been so many waves of transformation, like community, I feel like has transformed me, or like, or has just kind of swaddled me in that healing that you described. I think like to give one example or one picture of that. So I was still in graduate school. I'd found like the literature and I'd like just begun to sort of connect with a couple of people online, but that was kind of it for my experience of finding that history, and knowing that I was a part of something. And so I went to this symposium, the University of Michigan, and it was just for disabled creators, and it was just like maybe I think it was maybe like 20 people, and it was the first time that I was in a space like that, where I was in a real life space, something, we don't have a ton of these days anymore, but at the time, right, 2015, I think it was, we're all in this space together, all these disabled creators, and at the beginning of the week, we would do these, I can't remember what they were called. I'm sure there's a term for them, but it was like like intuitive movement, I think, right? And so we'd just be in this space, and it was just kind of about moving your body however you're comfortable. I think there was sort of like a rhythm or a beat in the background, and we just sort of like came into our bodies, felt present with our bodies, and allowed them to move in whatever way was comfortable and felt good. And at the beginning of the week, I was so uncomfortable. And I remember, I think like for one of the days, I just like went into the corner and like basically was just like in the fetal position. And I was like, this is how my body, this is where I'm at right now. And I guess there was something sort of already happening in me that I felt even like comfortable to do that. In itself. But as the week went on, and I was just with these people and kind of like eating lunch with them and like doing whatever kind of creative workshop exercises we were doing, and just like coexisting, it was like, I think maybe the last day we were there, that I realized that I was just crawling. I was just like crawling around in that space in a way that I hadn't since I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. So when I guess maybe just to give a little bit of context to that moment, I sort of became paralyzed slowly around the age of 3. It's like cancer treatments that were cumulative and sort of slowly. And so at that time, it wasn't like a jarring experience for me that I remember. I just sort of started moving my body differently. I would crawl around the house, crawl up the stairs, crawl down the stairs, like face forward, like as fast as I could, climb the kitchen cupboards, climb around the sidewalks. I had a little red trike I would ride around the neighborhood, hence the scabby knees. So I was just sort of comfortable moving however I wanted. I didn't even get a wheelchair until I was in 1st grade. So there was this sort of this comfort space. And then very early, I started to realize that was like not the way I was supposed to move my body, right? And I learned that to sort of keep the disabled movements to a minimum, and try to move as much as I could the way that I was supposed to. I'm using all of these air quotes.
Lots of air quotes.
Right. And so it had been probably at least 2 decades since I had crawled in front of anyone. And I didn't even realize I was doing it until I looked around with all these people who were also moving their bodies in the ways that, made sense and were particular to their embodiment. And it was like this wave of like recognizing how long it had been since I felt that comfortable. Just like the relief of being able to feel comfortable in my body around people. It was beautiful, and it was kind of heartbreaking to feel like the long span of time that it had been. And I wonder if that resonates with you, of the unique comfort and the relief in my body that I feel when I'm in community with people who understand living in a disabled body, or even disabled mind, right? Like the sort of wobbly intersection of body and mind. And I feel like I felt that again recently in a very different way. And I hope I'm not just rambling about this too much, Alex. I want to, like, I feel like the way to describe it is like in the specific moments. And another one that stood out to me, it was last summer, actually. Hannah Sawyer is a disabled poet, And I connected with her. She also lives in, went to school at the same university as I did, but at very different times. But she had this idea of running workshops, like creative writing workshops, to like just for disabled folks who wanted to write. And I'm a teacher and I'm a writer, and so I've done tons of workshops, but I'd never done a workshop with like just disabled writers. And like within like, I don't know, 15 minutes of the, I mean, it was Zoom, right? Like we weren't even in the same space, but like within 15 minutes of that space, it was like, oh, something that feels magic. I'm gonna like, again, here's my dramatic language, Alex. I know that you'll feel it with me.
Yes.
It felt like there were sparkles in the room. Like it felt like there's something magical happening in just the feeling of being understood, of not having to, like, there's so much I feel like about being disabled in spaces that I don't know, are unfamiliar or don't make space for that experience, where I think I forget or I lose track of how much I'm expecting to have to explain myself, or I'm expecting to be misunderstood. So familiar, so automatic. I think that I think that my body is like primed for that, and I think that's why when I'm in these other spaces, it feels like a physical relief of like, oh, I don't have to have like my armor up. I don't have to, in the same way. And I don't want to pretend like like it's all utopic, like as if there aren't ways that, you know, like that can be complicated, of course. But I do think that there's something so unique about that understanding. And that like really, to me, what feels like a really rare kind of recognition, that feels like literally I feel different in my body and there are sparkles in the room. I think that there's the term that I can't remember who coined it, but like crypt magic. Can't remember who coined that term. Hannah uses that a lot, Hannah Sawyer, and she could tell you who coined it. But we started using that term a lot during the workshop. Like, there's some crypt magic happening here. But yeah, I mean, like for you, what how has that felt to you?
I mean, I can really relate to that. I'm hearing that release, right? That relief. It's like you get to lower, you get to take off your armor, you get to lower your mask, right? You get to kind of feel that kinship, right? That connection. And what I find, and I'm hearing this in what you're saying, and then also I'm curious, like from part of your writing, is like it also allows, I think, for an opportunity to go deeper faster, right? Or maybe not deeper faster, but to explore the complexities of our identities in a way where, like, if I'm interacting with someone that has no experience with disability and I'm like, and I want to talk about our racial experiences, I feel like you're not going to understand that without me having to educate you about disability first, right? Or if I want to explore disability and queerness with another queer person and they're not have lived experience with disability, then I feel like, I mean, we can talk about queerness, but it feels like maybe you're missing a lens that's really important, right? And so I feel like when you're in a space with disabled folks, in my experience, it feels like it doesn't, like you said, it also doesn't just like absolve things. I've been around disabled people who are harmful or who
Of course.
have internalized ableism, but there's just that opportunity to be like, okay, if we are seeing each other, if we are connected in this way, there's this opportunity to talk about queerness, to talk about womanhood, to talk about fatness, to talk about immigration status, like all of those kind of things in a way that feels rooted in a common like language or like shared heart space. I don't know if
that makes a lot of sense, Alex. I that bit about like go deeper faster resonates with me for sure. I feel like when I am talking with someone, even someone that I'm close with, that I love, right? Like even people and family members, I often do feel like I need to, there's like a part of my experience as a disabled person that I have to like protect or defend, or like it's almost like I have to present the world as more than black and white than I feel like it is, in order to not, like, I don't know, imply something that I don't want to, or even something as simple as I guess I have disability pride on my mind a lot lately, because I guess it's the month of July. I think we're in it. Uh, and so that's a complicated thing. And being able to talk about, for me, I think the way that that's shown up is like even being able to talk about something like some of the loss or frustration of disability is a different conversation with people who don't live that. Because as soon as I open that door, I'm like afraid of where that's going to go in your mind, or where you might take that, or but I feel like if we understand this as a whole life, then we can explore the depth and complexity and contradiction of that with a little bit more freedom or ease. And not, I don't have to be worried that you're gonna take that and like take it somewhere that I didn't intend, right? Or forget about the complexity, or forget about the nuance, or the 90 different turns of that. And I think sometimes I can get in my head about that when I'm writing, and I don't know who's going to be reading it. And I think I was grateful to have the space of a whole book to do that. But even in a whole book, I know that there are people, I've seen it in reviews, like I know that there are people that pick that up and then put it into a box that is smaller than I intended for it to be in, or that I think it should be in. So all that to say, yeah, I think that the ability to go deeper, faster really resonates with me, in my experience, for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned kind of how people can misinterpret like your storytelling, right? Your writing, and I love the little like asides of like you specifically, like I'm talking to you, and I'm also really grateful for you as like a disabled white woman to be able to both honor your experience. Like I didn't feel like you shut like this is your memoir, right? So you were telling your stories that didn't feel performative, or like you were reaching to be like a savior, or like speak in a way where you were like, I'm an expert in all of these different areas. And it also felt like you consistently came back to being like, and I recognize the power and privilege I hold here. I recognize ways that there are disabled people who are experiencing more marginalization than I am. And talking about how white disability studies can be, or the whiteness of disability studies, or interrogating white feminism, right? Of missing like an intersectional approach. And I'd love to just hear more about your journey to kind of like celebrating intersectional like disability justice. How's that been for you? How is that for other people, where you are kind of advocating for exploring beyond just like, we're just talking about disability here, or yeah.
I have to tell you, I'm so glad to hear you describe your experience of my voice that way in the book, because I don't think there was a page that I wrote that I wasn't just like acutely aware of that, right? Like, I mean, almost like there are times when I was like, I can't even write this book, because like, who am I? Like you said, I'm a white woman, I'm straight, I'm cis, I'm thin, I'm like all of these privileges that are tangled up in my entire experience in ways that it's like I'm aware of them, and I'm also aware of all that I'm not aware of, so like, how do I even say anything about disability, as we've established, like this giant, sprawling, complicated I don't like experience even feels like too trite of a word to describe, or small of a word to describe what disability is. So speaking to that experience, so I was thinking about that in almost every page that I read. So it means a lot to me to know that you heard that in my attempt to acknowledge that as much as I could. And like, and so I'm aware of it to a certain extent in the book. And then I read Kia Brown's book, The Pretty One, I think like a couple of months after my book came out. Which is a beautiful book, and everyone should read it. It's funny, it's poignant, it's like full of pop culture. It's so fun and smart. But I got to this chapter in her book that is all about media representation. And I have a chapter in my book that's all about media representation. And Kia is a Black woman with cerebral palsy, who is ambulatory. Like I think she uses crutches, but she doesn't use a wheelchair. So like this very, like this, there's this way that I recognize so much of myself in her experience. And then there's this way that it's so different than mine. And I'm reading her chapter on media representation, and it's like opening this whole new door for me, and thinking about her experience as a Black disabled girl, and the different ways that the ways that different media are hitting us. I think there's even a specific show that we both talk about, and the different ways that different things that we see there, and the extra layer of what she doesn't see there, represented back to her, was like, I had completely missed it. And I don't know, I just bring that up to say that even being aware of that, there's also still so much I know. I'm sure that the next book I read will also, point out to me like, oh, there's just so much here. And there's so much more to look at and consider. And so I'm hoping to continue to understand more and recognize more. I think another one that has really hit me recently is reading about disabled women talking, like fat disabled women talking about their experience in medical spaces.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have my own set of what I would call like medical traumas in that space, and then to like go back and think about all of those memories through the lens of like also being a thin disabled woman, and just like having that hit me in different ways, and seeing how that has been a part of my experience. And also, I think another part of it, another wave, I'm just like vomiting to you all of the different like intersections that like each wave, is like a new one that I'm realizing has shaped my experience. It's just the fact that I am not only visibly disabled, but I think, a wheelchair is even like the symbol of disability, right? Like when people think of accessibility, there's like that blue icon with the wheel on it, right? And I know that even just being a wheelchair user, I don't know how much I would call that a privilege, but just like this particular intersection of experience is unique. And I think that I will continue to unspool that for as long as I'm alive. And like recognizing that. But I think what I came to in the end through the process of like writing this book and knowing, that's why I love the way that you started us off tonight, Alex, because like knowing there is no possible way for me to be able to not only represent disability, as a giant category, like whatever,
capital D disability.
right? But even like I knew that I was going to be missing things, and I could point to as much as I could point to, but I knew that I would want to go back and add things, like a month later or a year later. And so I think, and that's humbling, like that's like, there is like almost this way of saying, like, I know that I'm not going to win at this thing that I want to win at, like this thing that I want to be able to do, I'm not gonna be able to do it. So I think what was important for me in the process of writing that book, and a lot of that came together for me in my thinking when I was writing the chapter on feminist pool party, and like that, just the intersection of womanhood and disability,
Totally.
was that like the maybe the best thing I could do, in addition to acknowledging and trying to point out as much as I could out away from just my experience, was just provide the most specific, vivid capture of the very specific set of intersections that I embody, so that that experience was as full and as rich and precise and vivid for anyone that would pick up the book, so that there would at least be the experience of entering very deeply, into one very specific story.
Mhm.
And I think that that is something that I could do. And so I did try to be able to at least do that. And then say, now go read another,
Yes,
like
yeah.
now go read, something different than this. And hopefully one that like offers a different way of thinking about it. But the point is, like more stories, more voices. And yeah, it was definitely that is definitely something that I is with me, and I hope that I'm growing in my ability to point to more voices and bring in the perspective of different intersectionalities of this experience, because this is what I've got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just am so grateful that you expanded upon that for yourself, and you're just being so vulnerable in that process. I think in a moment of candor, like I was sharing with my roommate, how like I just your book, just like I use the word texture, and I feel like it just, you speak to the nuances and all these like little moments that I so related to, and just like naming, like judging a book from a cover, right? I'm like, we are different, right? And I'm like, how am I going to relate to you as like a cis straight white woman? And I think I was really surprised how much commonality there was, and I felt really seen. And I also feel like what you did, and what I desire from white people, from white women, right, where I feel like we see these cases publicly of harm, right, where white women vote for Trump, right, white women assault Black people, right. I don't know if you've ever read When White Women Cry, White Women's Tears Oppressing Women of Color. It's like a really great essay. But
Jotting it down.
yes, to see you name all of these intersectional facets of disability, and then in that feminist pool party, like that conversation with your friend talking about like, you've been handed this microphone, right, and who can you bring with you? It's like that's what we need from white people, right, is to not bathe in that like guilt or the like shame of having privilege. It's like, okay, you have the privilege to like tell a very beautiful story, share your memoir, and then who are you bringing along? Like, who are you lifting while you climb? How are you extending your platform? And so I think that's really exciting to see you lift up Amani and Kia and Alice, right? And all of these people that are doing similar work in different ways and offering more marginalized perspectives. I think you said something towards the end that I also wanted to make sure that we had time to talk about too. Within that is, you mentioned disability and womanhood, and as a cis man, right? That's not my experience, and I'd love to hear where you're at, you mentioned being a new mom, right? Like that's a different part of the story that's not in the memoir. So where are you at in that journey right now?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, good question. I was just saying to Micah, my partner Micah, recently, there's that part in the book where, so when I wrote the book, and anyone who reads it or will read it, I'm really candid about not being a mom in the book, and that I don't know if I'll ever be a mom, and I talk about like what it's like to be around women who are moms and to feel very outside of that. And when I became pregnant and then had Otto, our baby, I think that I sort of expected that some of that would be alleviated. I think I sort of thought like, I don't know. I never said this to myself, but I think there was a part of my brain that was like, maybe I will belong more to this club. And it was like yesterday where I said to Mike, I was like, I think being a disabled mom in some ways makes me feel even more distant from this, like, I don't know, imaginary, I think it is largely imaginary, but like very real, which is a funny contradiction, this imaginary, very real, like space of womanhood, like certified, verified, like womanhood and motherhood, and like what we care about as mothers, what we worry about as mothers. I'm doing a lot of air quotes again, like what it means to be a mother. I feel very outside of that as a disabled mom. And I think when we were talking earlier about like where I'm still searching for language and kind of feeling like I'm at square one again, it is very much about being a disabled mom. It has been so hard, Alex, to adjust to being a mom. And I feel like I am, in some ways, I have been thrown like right back at square one with a lot of things that I thought that I'd worked out for myself as just a disabled woman. And suddenly, it's like I didn't learn anything. It's like I didn't, like I feel like I'm thrown back into this space of like, well, I think a lot of internalized ableism is coming up. I think that that's how we would describe it. Yeah. In these very simple moments, like it started happening very early. Like, again, like day 2 of Otto's life, he just cried all the time. Yeah. He was just one of those babies that was in a perpetual state of suffering. And Micah, my partner, was like the only one who could soothe him. Right. And so there's so much happening here where I'm like, well, I'm the mom, like what's wrong with me as a mother if I can't soothe my baby? And also he would soothe him by bouncing and pacing around the house, which I could not do. Yeah. And so there's also like all of this stuff about like insufficiency as a parent, just as the disabled one. And can I even be a parent to this baby if I can't soothe him? And I literally can't do the things that he needs me to do. And also, side note, why is my baby ableist? Like, what is that? I thought that he would, like I thought he would know that I'm his mom and that I am the one, anyways. So that was like day 2. And there's been different iterations of that have continued in my dynamic with Otto. And I think that ultimately, like a couple of months ago, I came to this place of like, I don't even want to think of myself as his mom. I need for right now, I need to like get rid of that language and that framework and that term. We're starting from square one, kid. Like, I'm this person with you who is going to be with you for the long haul. And who are we to each other? And where are we in this moment right now? Right. And like, so I think one of those mornings when I was in that space, we were outside and he had found like these dried crumpled leaves in the backyard, and I just like picked one of them up by its dry little stem, and I was just like trying to show him how to twirl it. And I was like, this is where we're at right now. Like, you and me, here's a leaf. Look at this. Isn't this amazing?
Yeah.
And he started to do it. He started to twirl this little leaf. And in this moment, I was like, oh, okay, like we can do this together. Like, we can be together. And so I don't know, that's a very roundabout way to say, in that intersection of disability and womanhood. I think that this is a gnarly one for me. And I by no means thought that I had figured it out or sorted it in that chapter in the book, but I think I thought I'd gotten at least a little bit of a grip on it. It was one of the hardest chapters for me to write, as I think I'm candid about in the chapter. Like, it was very tangled and wobbly for me. And I think that becoming a mom has only affirmed to me, that is a sticky spot for me. I think I grew up in a time, in a space where the role of mother and like and like tied to womanhood, that womanhood is motherhood in some ways. I think that was sort of how the narrative that was ingrained in me from before I even had memories. I mean, like, there are videos of me from 1988, grainy VHS videos of me like nursing my baby dolls. Like, this was just like this thing. And so it's really it's a fraught space for me. It's continued to be fraught, but I feel like I'm hopefully that at the very least I'm like learning to breathe through it and ride the waves, and Otto and I can create our own subversive, like space together. So yeah, I'm still searching for words though. I'm still, like I'm gonna forever be working this one out, I think, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is, I'm, as I mentioned earlier, like my soup is like disability and queerness, and I almost hear this really. I feel like they go, hand in hand, crutch and crutch, right? Around like you're talking about like eschewing a label, right? You're moving away from like I am a mom, which behind that contains all of what that means, and more like we are connected. I love you. I care for you. I am, and I feel like that's almost like a very queer approach, right? Which helps to alleviate you of all these expectations and pressures, and sounds like also just like triggers, right? And trauma around pressure for your body to act a certain way, ways that we erase the complexities of motherhood. And so I just love hearing that frame. I've never heard somebody kind of frame it in that way, where it's just like, this isn't about a label, it's about like, this is, I just care for this, tiny nugget who like wants to spin leaves with me,
Yeah. See, Alex, this is us doing the like going deep fast thing, like the recognition. I feel like the way that you see that and understand that is really means a lot to me. So because I feel like I'm really scrambling for ways to describe it. So the fact that you get that, thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And to the like generative power of disability, right? Like, I'm hearing you process something that has offered you a new way of connecting to your child that I think would benefit anybody, right? Like, disability, I think it's so woven throughout your memoir. It's like disability is a generative force. It's magic. It's additive. It's not inherently negative. And so I think about queer friends who really struggle with fraught relationships with their biological parents, right? You're my mom, you're my dad. You do not treat me like a mother or a father, right? Straight people in my life, right? Dealing with racist family members, right? You are my aunt, you're my uncle, and I'm feeling really ashamed, right, of how we're related, right? And so even just focusing more on like the value and the depth of connection seems like such a subversion of like, you are this, so that means you act this way, because it's very clear nobody fits into those boxes in the same way, if at all.
Right. This is so funny that we like keep scrambling for them and like looking for them and trying to fit in them when it's so punishing. It's so punishing to us. But yeah, that's what we're doing for now. I mean, that's sort of how we've been surviving. Although he did just start saying mama. So
You're like, I'm back in.
we're like, what do we do with that?
Totally. Well, we just got the 5-minute reminder, and I really wanted to make sure that I could ask you this question. I have so many that I didn't get to ask, but we talked about the preciousness of like your younger self, and like how isolating and challenging it was and lonely at that time. And in therapy now, I'm working through like the idea of kind of that like queer crip time travel, right? Like the healing I'm doing now is healing my younger self. And so I wonder, for you, is there anything that you would like to offer your younger self? If she was tuning into this, what would you want her to hear? Or what would you want to say to her in this moment of sharing your story, your memoir with this audience?
Oh, Alex, now I'm like feeling mushy and soft and like a little bit. Okay. I'm thinking of her in her hot pink wheelchair, covered in smiley face stickers that like immediately started peeling and like really janky. What would I say to her? I think I would say like, you have it right there. Like, you have all of it right there with you, in you. Like, hold on to that, lean into that, sink into that. Because I think the impulse is so much to say like, I need to like go over there and buy that thing and like put it on my face and like put the clothes over, like obscure and hide and contort and change. And I just see her having everything she needs, more than she needs, like right within herself. And I know that where she's headed, I could see that part too, right? Like, and I would just say, you don't need any of that. You don't need any of it. Sit here with yourself, be with yourself, feel your body, listen to your body, and you've got it all. You've got it all right there. I don't even know if that makes sense to anyone else, but that's what I would say to her.
It makes sense to me. It feels like that, disability justice principle of wholeness. You've got everything you need. Your body isn't missing any. Your body, mind, isn't missing anything. And yeah, I love that as a message. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, of course. Do we want to take like a little breath? You mentioned like being embodied before we like transition from our conversation to the Q&A.
Yes, let's do that, Alex.
Yeah.
Yes,
do you have any practices that you like to do, or?
I don't know that I have thought of them as practices, but I'm in my chair all the time, and I like to like readjust, right? Like give my bottom a little rest.
A little stretch-aroni,
Move my hips. What about you?
Yeah, I'm feeling the lower back after like a day of typing. So
right,
yeah, giving that a good stretch, that feels good to.
My heart is not pounding as fast as it was when we started.
Well,
I've loved this time with you.
this has been so wonderful, Rebekah. All right, are you ready for the Q&A?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, first question is, for those that don't know, can you give a quick breakdown of the 504 sit-ins, please?
Alex, have you seen the drunk history telling of 504 sit-ins?
I sure have.
Ali Stroker.
So good.
I know. Okay, I feel like I'm gonna get some of these details wrong. So maybe we can do this together.
Mhm.
Because I'm trying to remember what it was that it was like there was this piece of legislation, and I don't remember what it was that had been like sitting on this governor's desk. Wasn't it even a governor? Here, this is where I'm like overthinking it. There was I think it was the 60.
Joseph Califano.
Yes, Califano.
Yeah.
It had been sitting on his desk for like 3 years, I think. And it needed, and he just wasn't signing it. It was sort of like he was just sort of like pushing it off, like I think wanted to like indefinitely just continue to not actually do anything about it. And I'm trying to remember what piece of legislation that what like
it was the section 504.
But so was there something that preceded it? Like
I think so. I think it was a part of some other larger legislation, and I think 504 was around like access features being mandated like through federal spaces. This is also my growth edge.
Right. But the point that
ultimately he was like too pricey. Like we're not.
Yes, right. Like I think that the idea of like this would not be something we would ever actually do, right? Like the idea that making, and which I think is a narrative that we've heard around a lot of legislation, like even the ADA, like costs too much, that's not realistic, right? So Judy Heumann, which if you have not read her memoir, Being Human, that came out last summer, it's amazing. There's also a YA version of it out right now. And a lot of other activists as well, but she's the one. I read her memoir, so like I think of her, and she also is just like like embodies all of the spirit of just like, we're doing this, it's happening, get in line, like follow my lead. So she there were these sit-ins like all across the country where disabled folks were coming in saying like, we are not leaving until this piece of legislation gets signed. And it was San Francisco, right, Alex, and that was where Judy Heumann was, where it went on. So I think like everywhere, that most every other city where this was happening, it was like within a day or two that people started to kind of go home. But in San Francisco, there was just like this group that was like, no, we are not leaving. Judy Heumann is like making this happen, and other activists with her. And it went on for days and days and days. And then there were all of these other groups that came in to support, like the Black Panthers were there, like assisting and like being, like bringing food, bringing water, like coming in and making sure that people had what they needed. And these were also people who, like for a lot of them, right, like disabled folks at this time, didn't have a lot of opportunities to be out in communities. For a lot of them, it was like the first time that they'd been out in the world and like empowered in this way. And so a lot of them also had like access needs that like they were running out of medication and like catheters, and like there was equipment that needed to be had. So the support of these other groups was like invaluable. Alex, you jump in if I'm missing anything.
Oh no, I mean, I love that I think that's the pieces that I love to highlight, or I guess the flashpoints, right, are like, it's the longest unarmed occupation of a federal building in US history.
Was it 28 days?
I think it's 26.
26 days.
26 days. Bradley Lomax was a wheelchair rider and a Black Panther. And so like really key to celebrate like Black disabled people in history being vital change makers, right? Had he not participated, they might not have gotten the support of the Black Panthers doing that cross solidarity movement work. And then, you know, the hot meals to sustain in that way. And then I also love, you know, I've heard stories through, you know, the Longmore Institute, the Paul K. Longmore Institute has an exhibit called Patient No More. And, you know, they have all these like firsthand accounts and stories and interviews of like, you know, ways that disability magic shows up, right? Like they cut off the phone lines inside so that people couldn't phone for help or resources outside. And then deaf people inside just sign to deaf people outside, right?
Yes, I love that moment. I love that moment. Right?
I think there's a story of a quadriplegic woman and a blind woman kind of forming like this interdependent friendship of, you know, the quadriplegic woman reading the newspaper to the blind woman during the day, and the blind woman like rolling the quadriplegic woman so she didn't develop bed sores, right? So the sit-ins are just this like really pivotal moment where San Francisco kind of exploded this disability civil rights movement to pave the way for the ADA later.
Right. And so finally, 26 days later, right? Like, oh, I mean, like, what an exciting piece of our history. And isn't it amazing that so many people don't know about it? Like every time I would bring this up when as a teacher, like none of my students had ever heard of it. And it's like, this is one of the most, I mean, like for no other reason, it's just like super cool and exciting, right? Like, don't we want to know about this, let alone like all that it connects to and all of the characters, people that are like a part of it, right? Like I say characters, like, don't you just want to see this film? Like, don't you want to see this on the screen? So yeah, huge, pivotal, and like led to a piece of legislation that is like more exhaustive than I think like any piece of legislation protecting and advocating for disabled folks like in the world. It's like it's not always implemented, as we could talk about also, but like the legislation itself is like a huge leap forward in so it's very exciting. One day it will be a film, I'm sure.
Yes, until then, Drunk History has hired disabled people to act it out, so everyone should go check that out.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, so the next question is, can you speak to how the pandemic has shown up for folks with varying disabilities?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'll say a couple of things, but I'm really curious also, Alex, what you would have to say about this. I mean, I think like from the very beginning, there has just been, I feel like in a lot of ways, the pandemic, it's like it revealed two massive things. I think there was like, on the one hand, there was like all of the ableism that you wondered if it was out in the world is just like glaring, right? Like in the ways that we're talking about human life and like quality of life and whose life is worth protecting and prioritizing and hierarchies of life, right? Like thinking about like hospitals and whose care is prioritized and who we're trying to protect, and all of the conversations about like I don't know, like in the early days of the pandemic, I remember so many conversations about like, oh, it's like the only people who are at risk are, you know, fill in the blank, as if like, oh, you don't need to worry because, right? As if those people aren't your teachers, aren't your, or like even if they aren't, like the value of that life being dismissed so much. But I think also the inability to recognize that also those people are in your life, even if you don't know it. So like all of that happening. But I think also, and this is the part that I feel like so cautiously hopeful about or like interested in, is the ways that we also saw this long needed innovation and creativity in finding new ways to for people to access and connect with each other. You know, like you think like telehealth, obviously, like the ways that we found to connect with each other without actually physically leaving our houses just sort of exploded overnight in ways that I think, you know, a lot of disabled folks were like, we've been asking for this for a long time. And in the pain of having to see that didn't, that like almost the pain of seeing how easily that came to be, you know, when the people needing it were a different, you know, population or but I think that there's this fear, this valid fear that now that things are starting to open up in different parts of the world, which also is like in itself kind of a fraught thought and conversation, there's this fear that eventually that those new points of access will be taken away, and this urgency to say like keep them in place, like continuing to offer telehealth and virtual options in all of these places, flexibility in the ways that we think about work and where we need to work, and all of that was sort of questioned in this way that should be questioned, and has been the opportunity for creativity has been there, and people have met that, and I just want that to continue. So I don't know. Those are the two things that I kind of see sort of unfolding, continually unfolding simultaneously. But Alex, what do you see?
Yeah. I mean, I would absolutely echo what you just shared. Certainly seeing the pain and the insult, right? Of like remote work, just a wand was waved and now it's available, right, to everyone. I think the question asking about varying disabilities, right? I think a lot about, like you mentioned, people being like, oh, it's just people who are 65 and older and chronically ill and disabled people, right? So, you know, these notes of eugenics showing up, right? And communicating whose bodies are more worthy. There's a really great hashtag, no body is disposable, right, where they're pushing back against the medical triaging that was happening, right, where people weren't being given treatment or they weren't being prioritized because they're disabled. You know, it's reaffirming this dark truth that some people just view disabled life as lower quality inherently. Which again, I just love to remind people all the time. I know people with 4 limbs who are very miserable. You know, like you could be non-disabled and have a very low quality of life. So let's just not get that twisted. But to be less glib, you know, I think there's also, you talk about this in your book, right? The cost of being disabled in a country, in a society that doesn't have universal health care, right? And so people are losing their jobs, then they're in these really precarious positions if we're not getting stimulus checks, right? Like disabled people, many disabled people are already at a brink financially. I'm seeing a lot of mutual aid happen on Instagram, seeing disabled people of color trying to ensure that they can maintain their housing. You know, so it's been really disheartening to see the ways that disabled people are experiencing the waves, right, of these like social consequences. And I think the last thing I would offer is just cautioning people this desire to like return to quote unquote return to normal, right? To go back to normal is like when we do a big zoom out, like COVID happened because we are not in a right relationship with our earth, right? Like Mother Earth is not happy with how we are treating her, and that's white supremacy, capitalism, ableism, patriarchy, right? All of those things coming together and saying we all need to work harder, produce more. You know, we're not attending to what we're extracting, what we're destroying, and so that creates a stage for COVID-19 to just flourish. And so I feel like if people are rushing to go back, they're really missing the point that like this is not, we don't check a box in humanity's history and say, oh, we did that pandemic, like done, right? Like could be another one right around the corner. I mean, we're not even through this one yet. So I think it's an opportunity for all of us to interrogate how our relationship to these systems is making it harder for us to like extricate and heal, and then will set us up for another really potentially more painful, traumatic experience in the future.
Yeah, and I feel, yes, beautifully said. And I feel like the pandemic has highlighted in this really pronounced way how connected we are to each other. Like we like to pretend, especially I know here, we like to pretend like we actually are just live in individual bubbles, and that our choices don't connect to anyone else, and our bodies don't connect to anyone else, and that is so false, right? Inherently false. Like we are connected to one another in a way that we cannot escape, even if we pretend like that's not the case. And I agree with you, like to think of us moving on from this after having felt that impact of that in such a tangible way, to move on and go back to these systems that ignore that just feels particularly tragic. So yeah, I feel like I will never, I feel like I knew that before, but like the actual experience of that connection and just how connected we are to one another, it's not something that I know will leave me, and I want us to all hold on to that. I think that changes the way that the choices we make, and changes the world that we build. So
yeah, and I think that you talking about changing the world that we build, that ties in really well to this next question. Can you speak to how environmental and climate justice movements intersect with disability justice?
I love this question, and I feel like I would like love to know how you would answer it. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I know. I know that there is a place in Berkeley, and I'm pretty sure I know what their name is, but I want to make sure I get it correctly. I'll do a cheesy plug here and just name I over the pandemic I've kind of been doing like a sip and Saturdays, so doing kind of interviews with different people in my life who are a part of other justice movements, right? And trying to just demonstrate and explore that cross movement solidarity. And I spoke with a friend, Sharon, who is really involved in food justice at Berkeley, but also like has awareness around climate justice, and not awareness, she's a rock star. But yeah, just thinking about how like when climate chaos creates inhospitable environments, like disabled people are particularly at risk, right? And so California, right, and the wildfires, PG&E was doing, our power company was doing power shutoffs to reduce spread of the fire, and then that means that there are disabled people in rural areas who maybe have less financial access, who don't have as much mobility privilege, right? Whether it's like access to public transportation or things like that. So they're basically kind of trapped. They might not have like food, or their equipment might not have power. So, again, seeing mutual aid, seeing the Disability Justice Culture Club in the Bay Area, right? Like Black and Brown, queer disabled people doing mutual aid, right? But it's not that PG&E is doing aid, right? The climate changes is going to impact people's access to food, people's access to breathable air, right? Like disabled people both like have that or Alice Wong refers to disabled folks as like oracles, like demonstrating the needs that our bodies have in really extreme conditions. And at the same time, I think being an oracle is risky work, right? And so you unfortunately are demonstrating the gaps in care like in real time and not abstractly. And so your body mind is like less safe, right? I mean, there's Rooted in Rights has a movie about Hurricane Katrina and how, you know, disaster preparedness is not inclusive of disabled folks. Usually the instructions are just to just wait and someone will get you, you know. So I think all of that comes to mind for me. And then I'll turn it to you. I just want to name this World Institute on Disability. Does a lot of really excellent work around those intersections. So I just want to give them a shout out.
Yeah, I need to write that down too. Will you say it one more time?
Yeah, of course. The World Institute on Disability.
Okay. You know what I think of with this conversation is Alice Wong as well. I feel like it was a few years ago when everybody got rid of straws, right? That was like the whole thing was getting rid of, right? Getting rid of the straws. And I remember reading this piece that Alice Wong wrote about her experience of that, right? Of like someone who needs to use a straw to drink, and not just straws, but like so much of disabled folks depending on relying on like single-use plastics, right? I mean, like that is what my catheters are made of. I have to go through many of them a day, right? To be perfectly candid. And so I think that the conversation focusing, I think when the conversation about climate change and environmental justice and that focuses on like the individual, the burden on the individual to solve this problem by not using a straw, it just feels like it's missing so much of the big picture, and disabled folks are kind of at this odd juxtaposition between those two spaces of kind of being put in this position of feeling like they are somehow responsible for climate change by using straws and catheters, and so I think the importance of reframing that conversation and looking at like the bigger problems of like how this is happening and why, and the big players in that, and instead of putting that burden on the individual person with the straw. I don't know, that's something I think about a lot. Alice's piece really was really striking to me and thinking about that in a different way. I think that we are often thinking about the individual choices that we make, and they matter. I'm not saying that they don't, but in thinking about the big picture of how we got to this place and how we will get out of it, it seems like misplaced energy.
Yeah,
that's what I think of.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Rebecca, but it sounds like you're almost saying that millionaires, billionaires, corporations almost have a responsibility to
It's almost like I'm saying that, Alex.
help address the deep trauma that they've caused to the planet that we live on.
Yeah. Like if we just wanted to look at the charts and graphs there for a minute, in terms of the impact, yeah.
But you know, they need to go to space. So
whoa! I like feel okay.
I know. Woo! So very quickly, I answered a question in the Q&A, and I have to answer it aloud so this person can hear. Someone asked for the name of the author of When White Women Cry. The author is Mamta Motwani Akapati. I have not pronounced it aloud in a long time. The article, it's an article, you can just Google it. It's just when white women cry, when white women's tears oppress women of color.
Thank you for that.
Yes, of course. We are like so almost at time, and I really want to ask, I feel like these two questions kind of dovetail, so if you want to just whip up some magic in this last minute. I'm going to read this last one. It says, what are your hopes and dreams for the future of disability justice? Which I feel like kind of also ties into the other question of what do you observe in the disability justice community that you would like to see the rest of society take on?
Good questions. Okay, I'm just gonna go with what comes into my brain, and then Alex, let's just do the whipping up the magic. Okay.
Totally.
to me, I think part of that disability justice community space is something that I've seen happening between you and me all night, which is that recognition that we have needs, right? Just like the recognition that we have needs and we have different needs, and checking in with those needs and being flexible with those needs and pausing to acknowledge those needs, like living in a world where we're allowed to have needs, and then supporting each other in that, and like making space for that, and creating the swaddle around that, right? That like that is not only fine, but like good, and thank you for having a need so I can have a need. I don't know, I think that to me is what I see as really unique and gorgeous about what I've seen in our community. So I think that is something that is not like, disabled folks are not the only ones who have needs. That is like a part of living in a human body.
Yes.
In the world. And so I think that like when I think about like this large, if I'm just dreaming for the sky, right, and like thinking about hopes and dreams, it's like, can we live in a world where we do that for each other? And like that is at the core, the center of like how we shape our spaces and our systems and our, I don't know, like our classrooms and our spaces of government and our homes and our streets and our, like, can we live in spaces where we're thinking about the fact that we have needs, and how can we anticipate those? How can we create flexibility enough that allows those, even ones we don't anticipate, to come up and we don't crumble? Like, that's what I hope for. And I, like long game, that's what I'm hoping and dreaming for. Alex, what about you?
Lay it on you, huh? Well, I mean, you painted a very beautiful dream that I can't wait to help manifest and bring to fruition. Disability justice to me is I both hope for the future of it, and what I want people to observe is just like what happens when you really create an opportunity for the leadership of the most impacted, and like how free and liberated our society can be when those people feel free and liberated. And I have so many experiences with Black and brown, queer and trans disabled people, and teachers and healers, and people who I haven't even had the pleasure of meeting in person, right? I'm just engaging with their content, like have unlocked so much healing in myself that I want that for everyone. And I want people to turn to them, not as a last resort because a pandemic has struck, right? But because we're excited to hear, to just like bask in their wisdom, I can't recommend enough Leah Lakshmi Piepsna Samarasina's care work. I'm going to put that in the chat for the interpreters, because I know Leah's name is long, but
yeah.
I mean, the care work, the colon is dreaming disability justice. So if you need anything there, it's right there for you. And I'll just close with a Patty Byrne quote, because Patty is like just a patron saint, a beacon for me. She, in Skin, Tooth, and Bone, kind of a disability justice primer, she says, all bodies are unique and essential. All bodies are whole. All bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. We are powerful not despite the complexities of our bodies, but because of them. We move together with no body left behind. This is disability justice.
Yes.
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 Rebekah, this was so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing the space with me tonight.
Thank you. I dare I say there are sparkles in the room. Like, thank you so much.
My lip gloss.
This has been such a joy for me, and I'm just gonna love continuing to follow you and seeing what you're up to in the world. And I hope we get to connect many times more in the future, because this is just such a joy.
Yes, me too. Glampy and sitting pretty. It rhymes. There's a ring to it. We're bringing it. So
Fits.
yes, thank you for your book. Thank you for your writing. Thank you for all of the community building that you're doing. And yeah, I can't wait to see what's next for you as well.
Mhm. We
We did it. So I'm
go into the
gonna
night.
yes, I'm gonna turn it to Alex for the outro.
Thank you all so much for attending tonight. We hope you'll join us for more of our upcoming talks and workshops. This conversation was recorded today, so if you would like to watch it again or share it with your community, it will be available on our YouTube channel at this same link. We will also feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at www.ciispod.com or by searching CIIS Public Programs on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.